freak accidents on random victims, or a two-headed clown that lives deep underground. You may think, it wouldn't be that bad, or I'd just be strapped to the teeth and I'd make it, but I don't think anyone actually realizes just how bad it would be. In this video, I'm going to be going over the first week of living in the Trevor Henderson universe, starting with the first few minutes. Let me know down in the comments what's the last thing you'd want to see when first entering the Trevor Henderson universe. It's a Tuesday afternoon and you're finishing up a class, when you start to notice a large amount of birds on the outside of the window, swarming and almost running away. Something is up, but for now you have to get home. Walking through the halls, you notice they are mostly barren. God knows where everyone went, but it's starting to really mess with your head. Come to think of it, the library that you were studying in was a little bit sparse today. Could everyone have gone home? Regardless, I think it's time you should join them. So you begin to walk out the front of the school, only to start hearing a school bell behind you. And that wouldn't be so weird, except it's way past the end of the day. And to make it worse, it just keeps repeating over and over again. It ends up being a lot more terrifying than you could have ever imagined it was. It takes a second to figure out what you're looking at, but it's unmistakably an incredibly large school bell peering over the top of one of the buildings, staring in your direction. In a confused panic, you run in a random direction away from the school, but this is one of the worst mistakes you could possibly make, as this is very far from the last nightmare that you're going to encounter. Okay, so before I move on with this guy's specific scenario, I want to go ahead and back up and go over what would be going on as a whole right now. Starting with the giants that people would begin to see off in the distance, noticeably causing a little bit of a panic. On top of this, gigantic storms and other natural disasters would likely be coming along with them, some of which I'll be going over in detail more later. Regardless of this, everyone would be trying to evacuate the cities and now the other areas where they're approaching all at once, causing massive traffic jams and a lot of chaos. Almost as if they were trying to evacuate like a tornado hitting the city. But in a weird way, that's basically what's going to happen. Some giants would even be appearing as if they were coming down from clouds. In some cities, fires would be breaking out, filled with the wildfire giants, and in the worst cases, it would appear like the cities would be entirely wiped off the map. But the sight of them alone would cause more panic than most people realize, as many people would be just struggling to comprehend what the hell was going on. And the worst part is the crowding of all the highways that would be caused by the panic would make everyone stuck on the roads, and it would become extremely easy for a certain gigantic worm. So now that we've gone over that, I want to return back to our example, who is unfortunate enough to still be blissfully unaware on what is happening. On the walk home though, everything would start to become unmistakably weird, and there's no way you could not figure out that something crazy was going on around you. For example, you would begin to see stuff like giant piles of trash bags just sitting on the street or areas around you where they really shouldn't be. And then no matter how far you walked, they would just keep appearing in front of you or around you, almost as if you're seeing the exact same pile again and again. But as most people know, trash doesn't move on its own, so this would be impossible. Except for the fact that this is not trash. Rather, the disturbing creature, Mr. Bags, who is designed to look similar to common trash, only to devour people who get too close. The sight of this, understandably, would send you into a panic, but lucky enough, you were only like a minute from your house. But trust me, it's about to get a whole lot worse. By the time the first few hours have hit, people have likely begun to die en masse. The giants have begun their damage, killing thousands. Entities like Cartoon Cat have likely at least claimed a few dozen by now, and with the highway and bridge worms basically having a field day, it's safe to say things are getting really bad. On the flip side, however, the government is likely trying to get this under control, but honestly, how can they? These incidents would start being broken up into two categories. One being the very big, obvious ones that would be requiring a majority of the firepower and with that collateral damage. And then the ones that are a lot more small and isolated, hiding themselves in areas and then ambushing people. But that's assuming that all of these things are, again, their own species instead of just each being one entity in one location, so it'd be a lot more widespread. Unless it's something like Cartoon Cat that can essentially be everywhere at once anyways, so it doesn't really need to be more than one. But it's not just city areas. Rural areas would also be hit almost as hard, with trucks being picked off by country road creatures and livestock being threatened by the Red Witch, who Trevor himself gave the caption stating, it's in the field again. Go check on the cattle," leading me to believe that it's a reoccurring blight in these rural areas. Police would understandably be overwhelmed with all the calls they're getting of people being attacked by various different entities, and most of them would just give it up and go home to protect their own families. With the military having a very similar predicament, but instead being preoccupied with, the giant problem, too much to be able to help anyone else with any of the other predicaments going on. Regardless of this, I'm willing to bet a sort of EAS alert would be announced to the public, telling people to shelter in place inside of their homes. If only that would make them safe. In a panic, you would probably just get home and begin barring the windows and doors, not realizing that something could already be inside. Before you cover the last window, you notice that, hey, at least some of the wildlife seems to be surviving, as you're able to catch a glimpse of a deer outside one of the windows. Oh god, maybe it's better we don't look outside. But watching the TV isn't much hope either. Do not go outside for any reason. It would be better to starve to death than to let one of them catch you. Huh. Go figure. But right as that last word hits, you hear something rummaging around in your cabinets. A large hand jolts across the floor and then back into the darkness, confirming your worst fears that something has already made it inside. Well, it seems like our friend here has got this all figured out, so we'll check back on him later. While this situation might seem like a horrible example, it's just one of many that would be going on all at once. People will be discovering things in their basement, in the alley next to their house, but let's take a second to figure out one of the worst locations that you could have been when this all started.
Has your tech support left you high and dry in the past? Do computer and network complexity...
Now at first glance, the woods seems like it would be one of the best locations that you could go during all of this. However, it wouldn't take long to realize that this is a giant mistake due to just the sheer amount of entities that would be roaming around here. I want to start with the most obvious of which being the threat of Siren Head, who I'm sure everyone knows about at least a little bit. But Siren Head, for those who don't know, primarily is going to wait in the forest making alarms to lure people in. The worst part is, in a situation like this, alarms would be going off a lot regardless to warn people about the outbreak of these entities, meaning most people wouldn't think twice when hearing a warning siren in the woods. And by the time they did, most would already be dead. Now, I don't think people realize how, devastating it would be if these things existed in the woods and were just these apex predators of humans. Because think about it this way, Siren Head is incredibly fast to the point of being able to catch up with a speeding car. Not to mention he could probably kill you almost instantly if he caught you. And I can also assume he can detect you from extremely far away. Think about it this way. Being in the woods with Siren Head is kind of like being in the Arctic around a polar bear, who, for reference, is still only like a third of Siren Head's size, but still has a 90% chance of killing you, even if you're like a mile away. So imagine what your chances would be against Siren Head, not to mention the other entities like the precursor of the First War, whose name alone already interests me, but not enough to be within 100 miles of this thing. Regardless, it appears to be a forest giant, and therefore another thorn in your side. Well, a thorn in the sense that, rather than being a mild annoyance, it destroys your entire bloodline, if that paints a better picture. The forest already contains enough cryptids and mysteries without being in this universe, so you can imagine all of them being a complete red zone. But in the first few hours, people are still kind of mentally lost and disconnected from reality when you're all the way out here. So you would be forgiven for not noticing what's going on, especially if you were camping in the middle of the boons. But post noticing a creepy stalking creature or two, you should begin to realize that something is a tad fishy, and that would be likely the hag coming out of the nearby lake and devouring a few children. Okay, it's been a few days now, so let's check back in with our homebody situation. Let's say you're a bit lucky and loaded a couple bear rounds into that home invader, as every red-blooded American should, and meandered your way into the attic. Here you have a sort of window that you can now see outside again, so let's see what's going on out there. And the curtain goes down. Within a few days, the government would likely begin to put together a sort of survival list. Hell, if I can do it, they can. But anyone who's seen any sort of analog horrors like this would know that they're never really that good, and people would still continue to die en masse. So with nothing really to do but sit here, you would just lay your head down for a brief rest. Okay, so you're probably wondering how it could be humanely possible to fall asleep with the massive amount of entities roaming around your neighborhood and likely even inside your home. Well, to be honest, if you even want to have a chance, you're going to need to put something comforting to distract you. But that usually